API Connect video series. This presentation will show you how to create a REST API to a SOA service. Begin this construction by logging into the dashboard of your API Connect management portal. Click the menu icon and then click Drafts. Once you arrive at the Drafts screen, click on APIs. Click Plus to add a new API. In the ensuing dialog box, enter a title for the new API, and then click Add. This brings you to the design screen for the new API. Going down the screen, we come to Schemes, which we must use HTTPS if we are going to use this on Bluemix or any public cloud. This will consume application JSON and produce application JSON as opposed to the XML that the backend SOA is expecting. We leave the security definitions in place. This will require any application to provide an IBM client ID. Under Paths, which is the path that the user of the API will invoke, we will change that to something that we will then publish to the users of this new REST API. They will never see the real URL of the actual backend. This currently is set up by default as a GET. However, because this is a SOA backend, we do want a POST rather than a GET, and we will not use the GET, so we delete it. We now must create a set of services that actually represent the backend. We do this by uploading a WSDL file. Here we look at the actual WSDL file, and we see under the WSDL definitions the namespace of the backend SOA resource and a check request XSD and a check response XSD. For now, however, all we need to do is upload the WSDL, and the WSDL is parsed automatically and shows you the services that are available. We pick the one service that we want to use here. This automatically creates two services, an account inquiry and a check request, which are defined in the WSDL. Now we go create the definitions that are based on the inbound JSON payload. We begin to create the name of the definition, which in this particular case will be the JSON check request. And now we must populate the name of this object with the various properties. So we start by defining the first of the properties. Here we see the inbound JSON payload for reference. We will need to create all of these properties in the definition that we are creating for the API Connect. So here we create payor account name. Now, I'm not going to show you how we do all of these. You can understand how you make those when you're all done. It'll look something like this. Notice that this continues to add new properties to the top of the list rather than the bottom of the list. We'll now create the definition for the response. Just as before, we see an example of what the JSON check response is that we want to send to the original caller of the API. So we have a check response. And once again, we walk through the elements that are in the outbound JSON payload one by one and create these properties. And we won't walk through all of those particular steps. Once you're done, you have these two definitions, check response and check request, and we have these two services that came from the WSDL. Now we assemble our API logic. Click Assemble, and then on the Assemble screen, click Data Power, then remove the invoke that we will not use. Once you create a service, you can now simply drag the service up onto the assembly line, and because it knows that you created this service from a WSDL that represents a backend service, it automatically creates the two maps. The maps translate or map the JSON elements that come from the request to the XML elements that the backend SOA service is expecting. And here you can see that there's quite a list of these possible objects that again came from the WSDL, but we want the one that we created. Here we are now at the input map. You'll notice on the left is the definition we created, and on the right is the XML definition that came out of the WSDL. Now we simply drag and connect the various elements together. We have to repeat this process in order to do the back end or in order to deal with the response coming from the back end once the SOA backend has responded. So we proceed the same way. We create the maps using the drag and drop capabilities of the user interface. Once this is complete, we can now go and arrange to set up the actual invocation, which is in between the two maps. It's a good idea to save it first so that the invocation can show you any warnings that happen to be there. The target URL is coming directly out of the WSDL. You may need to change this URL depending on how you built your backend or where you placed your backend. An examination of the remaining inputs to the invoke show that we are only using the defaults. Click All APIs in the upper left-hand corner to return to the list of all available APIs. Your new REST to SOA API is now available to publish in any product that you choose.